Greetings, family. We are now live. Welcome to the Sista Shanice Show platform. Thank you so much for joining me today. What an interesting show I have lined up for you. At some point, I will be plugged in to an event that's happening in Nottingham in the UK, but they are running behind schedule. But because I'm an on-time person, well, some of my friends will tell you otherwise, but because I like to try to be on time when I say I'm going to go live on YouTube, that is exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going live, and we will be joined by our family in Nottingham at some point along the way. So let me just share the link with them as well as I pick that up from YouTube. Please help me to share the link. Let everybody know that we are indeed live and that they can join me here today on YouTube. What a presentation I have lined up for you. And, to those who do my training courses, you'll know that I always tend to pack in so many slides because, our story is vast. And I like to put a bit of context to what I'm doing. I like to put a bit of depth to the story as I tell our story. I like to try and give credit where credit is due as I tell our story. Remember some of our greats, our revolutionary freedom fighters in this instance. It's so important. And so I need to include them in my slides, you see, and so that tends to expand the presentation a little bit. Now, apologies for the quality of the internet. Someone did comment on one of my lives. It's like, it's about time you got yourself some decent internet, they said. But I have the top internet here in this country, and I'm just, want to say that here, I actually pay twice the amount that I pay for the internet in the UK, more than twice the amount. Yet the quality of the internet here is what it is, and this is the reality of the situation that our family members on the continent are actually faced with and face on a daily basis, paying so much more, and the quality they get is just so inferior. So apologies, but please do note that when we go into the presentation, you won't be seeing me at all because, I will be behind the screen and you'll be seeing the presentation that I'm delivering. So I'm just giving us a couple more minutes for family members to come through the door and join me in the house. When you do come in, let me know that you are indeed in the house, and, it'll be great to have you join me. I know there's always a lot happening on a Sunday, and I don't normally go live on a Sunday, as you know, but today is an exception because it is African Liberation Day. Well, yesterday was actually African Liberation Day, but we celebrate, for the entire 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And as I said, I'm actually delivering a presentation today for you, which is going to be a revolutionary perspective of our journey so far on our liberation struggle. Now, as I said, our journey and our history is vast. So apologies in advance, if I don't actually capture for you, what you may consider to be a monumentous kind of landmark in our history, but the chat is there. So please do, post in the chat and, rise up who you may want to rise up, if you want to rise up a particular revolutionary freedom fighter, one of our heroes or sheroes, please do, go ahead and do so in the chat as well. And so just giving family members a few moments to come through the door. And actually, while I do that, give the family a little while to come through the door, just want to remind you all, actually, of my books that are available. And it'd be wonderful if you were to have those books on your bookshelf after having read them, and then, you know, share them with others. One of my books you can see up there is The Remarkable Accomplishments of Ancient African Civilization. It is a phenomenal book for you to have in your back pocket, and for every young person in your circle to have as well. None of our young people ought to be growing up with the feeling or with the lack of understanding and knowledge of some of our great accomplishments. I mean, there must be well over 100 listed in that book there. And as I said, I do tend to, you know, put a bit of context. So there's so much that we have accomplished as a people, you know, over the hundreds of thousands of years. But you're not going to hear about it in their school, colleges, and universities. In fact, they deliberately omit our history because they don't want us to know how great we really are as a people. So we've got to do that job of sharing our history, because if young people grow up with the knowledge and understanding of their greatness, they're already going to be feeling as though they are from a great stock and a great lineage and have a great heritage, you know, from great lands, you know, originators and conquerors of so much. And so if you set them up in that way, so that they have that level of confidence as they go through the miseducation system, they're more likely to come out the other end, you know, being of extreme value to your family, your community, your nation, you know. But if we have young people going through the miseducation system feeling as though, you know, they are less than, they're inferior, never accomplished anything, never have done and never will, then unfortunately the likelihood is that young person is going to come out the miseducation system very damaged indeed. And we all know only too well the challenges that we have in societies where there are groups of young people who feel, you know, disenfranchised, disconnected, don't want to identify with their race because they feel that their race hasn't accomplished anything. You know, it is soul destroying, and they happen to, you know, turn out to be a destruction to their community. And we don't want that, do we, family? So yeah, get the book and make them feel confident, make them feel 20 feet tall, okay? So that's the Remarkable Accomplishments of Ancient African Civilization. And another one of my books that I can highly recommend is the book that I've written about a Black king of Anglo-Saxon England, none other than King Offa. He was the king of Mercia, but he was so powerful and so influential as the king of Mercia that he basically ruled either through marriage, through his military might, you know, the geographical area of the place that we know today as England. Okay, so he was the first, you know, to have that level of power, you know, at that time. Prior to that, England was still very much divided into numerous kingdoms, and they had a different king, Black king, for the different kingdoms. But, you know, this particular king, King Offa, he was so powerful, as I said. You've got to get the book to read about him and find out more about him as well. And of course, there's the free, those two you get from Amazon. And of course, free of charge on my Gumroad site, you can go to sistershanice.gumroad.com and get free of charge my book that is a tribute to Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Wow, the great Pan-Africanist, okay? So as I said, that's free of charge, totally free of charge. Let me check the address to make sure I've given it to you correctly. All you do is go there, sistershanice.gumroad.com. Sister is spelled with an A, S-I-S-T-A, and Shanice. So sistershanice.gumroad.com. Go there, get a free tribute book. And if you go there and you think, oh, how do I get it for free? All you do is you go to checkout in the way you would go to checkout if you was going to buy something, and you just put 0 next to the pound sign, and you'll get it absolutely free. But if, you know, you'd like to make a donation, you know, and you want to put a number, next to the pound sign, you know, that would be much appreciated as well. But no pressure. I'd rather that you had the book free of charge and that you shared it with family and friends widely, because wow, Marcus Garvey was one of these greats who significantly influenced my mindset when I was growing up. And so when I came into the knowledge of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, well, that's when I came into the knowledge of who I was as an African. And it was so empowering, so empowering. And so, you know, that's why I did the book, because I wanted to empower, you know, thousands of young people around the globe. And I would certainly welcome some of those thousands of young people to be the young people in your life, in your circle, in your network. Okay, I've posted the link to a few of my contacts. So they'll have the link when they go to their phones, letting people know that I'm live and that they can tune in. Okay, so let me actually go to the site myself, see if there's any messages in the chat. You know, let me know where in the world you're viewing me from, you know, and so that I can welcome you. Hey, we got a few people in the house already. Absolutely fantastic. We got Ainso TV saying, greetings, Sister Shanice. Looking forward to the presentation. Asta Ashana, a beautiful sister from Conscious World Consciousness. Oh, my sis. Peace, oneness to you, Annie Ank. And, you know, my sister Asata Ashana, please do post details about your event in the chat. I don't delete any of the messages from the chats unless they're abusive. And so if you've posted something and it does get deleted, it just means that you've got to post it again, maybe use different words, because the system here that YouTube uses does automatically block some messages. And I certainly wouldn't want it to be your message. Okay, so yeah, Annie Yang, peace, oneness, at Black at you, Mikey Simba, welcome, welcome, Mundele, Yengelumbu Kiambote, beloved. Yes, welcoming you as a Pan-Africanist brother, I know from the Congo, but currently in the UK. Rise up, Mikey. Great to have you in the house as well. Yes, that is indeed great news, isn't it? I'm telling you. I prepared a presentation yesterday, and this morning when I heard the breaking news, I had to, you know, update it. It just goes to show, you know, yesterday when I was doing the presentation, I was doing it in the present. But by the time today come, that was history, and I had to update my presentation. What am I talking about? If you don't know, you're going to get to know very soon. Doravel is in the house. Rise up, rise up. Great to have you in the house, Dorel. Yes, B1 all the way, Black First all the way. So I'm going to start the presentation because you know what? I've always got so much that I'm just excited to share with you all as a family, okay? And I don't want to waste too much time waiting for, you know, the house to be full, because those who come later can always join us on the replay. Yeah. So yeah, I've got a lot of slides that I want to get through, and each slide is a story in its own right, family. Please do, yeah, have your conversations in the chat as well, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat and bring in, you know, some of your messages along the way if I'm able to do so. Okay, so let me get ready to share screen because we're going to do this. Okay. So just need to do what I need to do here to share screen, and then to put the presentation in the right mode as well. So let's get behind that screen there so that I can get it in the right mode so that you can get that slide view. Okay, it takes a little while when I'm in Zoom to do these things, so bear with me. Okay, family, hopefully you're all hearing me. Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Let me know that you're hearing me. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know if you can see the slides. And also, family, just, yeah, give me a heart. And if you agree with anything that I say along the way, just click the 100%, okay? Because I want to know that you're hearing me loud and clear, okay? So just waiting for a couple of thumbs up to come in to the chat box there so that I know that you're actually hearing me. I'm sharing my screen right now. You should be looking at the first slide that says African Liberation Day 2024, Revolutionary Pan-Africanism presentation. Give me a thumbs up, give me a heart, give me a 100%, give me a signal to let me know that you are hearing me. And let me go over to my phone as well. And let's just have a little listen and hear what's coming through at the moment. Okay, yes, I can hear my voice there. Oh, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jay, for letting me know I'm coming through loud and clear. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so family, today's presentation is entitled African Liberation Day 2024, Revolutionary Pan-Africanism. It's a presentation that I was asked to actually prepare to deliver online at an event that's happening right now in Nottingham in the UK. But unfortunately, they are running behind time. And at some point, I will be plugged in. But I'm pressing ahead because I did put out the notices that I would be delivering the presentation today from this time at 2 p.m. And so I want to actually do so. Okay, so what am I going to be focusing on today? I'm going to be focusing on our historic Pan-Africanism journey. First of all, I'm going to give an overview. I'm calling it a dynamic overview because our history of activism is so vast. Yeah, wow. It will take, you know, a whole series of presentations to give the due credit that our revolutionary freedom fighters actually deserve. And what I'm going to also do in this presentation is I'm going to include the role of the Black Brits, the Africans who lived in Britain during that revolutionary era. And the reason why I'm going to do that, particularly going to highlight the role of the Black Brits, is because I think that quite often, you know, our role in the diaspora gets overlooked. And because that happens, so it might lead some of today's people in the diaspora, it might leave them with the impression that maybe they don't have a role to play towards our revolutionary struggle, and that all of that work needs to be done on the continent. But that certainly is not the case. We do have a really important role to play, and you're going to find out from here, if you don't already know, and I'm sure most of you do, but you know, for all the people who are new to this, you know, you're going to get an insight as to what the role in the past has been of Africans in the diaspora towards the liberation struggle. And of course, you know, coming up to the present day today, we're going to be looking at some of the progressive developments that's been happening in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Senegal. So happy Liberation Day to the entire family. And I look forward to you joining me on this journey. So welcome to the presentation. For those of you who don't know me, because you're maybe watching this channel for the first time, my name is Sista Shanice. I'm a journalist, researcher, community activist, Pan-Africanist. I'm a trainer, radio host. What else do I do? I'm a YouTube vlogger. And I'm always honored, and it's always a privilege, family, to be able to address my wonderful, wonderful audience. And, you know, today I'm going to be speaking about, you know, African liberation and the period that's those some of the most significant periods in our history. Okay, so this year actually marks the 61st anniversary of African Liberation Day. And it was officially it was officially designated African Liberation Day back on the 25th of May, 1963 by the Organization of African Unity. That was the predecessor to African Union. And, we're seeing our revolutionary dream unfold today. So these are really exciting times. Sometimes it's a period where we're in full-scale war. Another time it's peaceful, but there's a lot of agitation and organizing and protesting. And, so there's all different stages of the liberation struggle. And, history is being written as we speak, family. These are really dynamic and interesting times in terms of our liberation and our desire as a people, because that's what African Liberation Day is all about. It's a reminder to all of us as Africans worldwide that we are in a fight for our total liberation, that we are in a fight for self-determination, that we are in a fight to reclaim our countries from the colonizers. So join me on this journey through time, and join me as I look at the progress that's happening in some of our African countries today. Right, let's go to the next slide. Right, when we talk about African liberation, we need to talk about our liberation and self-determination, because as we know, we are a people whose countries were conquered, and then all of us, were subjugated to being dominated by all these foreign powers. And so, the struggle quite often starts there. But, it's also important to remember before we go into that era that we are the original people of the world, and that, as a people, we have over 2,000, at least over 2,000 languages and cultures. And we have a beautiful culture, a beautiful tapestry, colorful culture across 54 vibrant nations. And Africa is the second largest continent in the world, and has its different regions as well that we're all very familiar with. And as the original people and the ones who are the origins of humanity itself, we were at the beginning. So when was the beginning? Probably millions of years ago. So as Africans, the likelihood is, we've probably been around for millions of years. But how much of those years do we know of in terms of our history? Well, what we do know is that we have hundreds of thousands of years of known global history. That's hundreds of thousands of years of evidence of our existence here on this earth. But the evidence has largely been deliberately omitted from the modern history books. It's been omitted from the national curriculums, from the Eurocentric perspective of our history. It's hard to find our history in their academic circles, but it certainly does exist. And so, but sadly, the history that most of us know today is the history that has been rewritten. And it was rewritten, that history was written, and our history was rewritten during the centuries when we were enslaved as Africans, and when our countries were conquered. They rewrote history and, gave us their version of a story which has largely been made up. They've, written themselves into some of our countries, into the characters, the great characters of our history. We have to dig so deep just to find out about our beautiful history. And I want to rise up all of those who are doing the research, into our history. We have some wonderful, wonderful historical stories to tell. But for today's presentation, though, we're going to have to start with the impact of the downfall of us as Africans, and therefore, our fight for freedom, our fight for liberation, our fight for emancipation, and the fight that continues through to today. Okay. So what is the impact of the hell of a course that we as Africans have experienced? I think most of us are familiar with the term Holocaust. Well, our term that I like to use is our hell of a course, because the African hell of a course involved the largest forced relocation in history and had a profound impact on us as Africans and on the African continent as well. So between 1500 and 1800, at least 12 to 15 million people, and I'm sure that is a gross underestimation. I'm sure the numbers were much, much higher. But, at least 12 to 15 million individuals, possibly more, were actually kidnapped from Africa and from Europe as well. Because, not only were we as Africans in Africa, but we were also in Europe as well. But that's a whole different history. So, we were kidnapped and we were sent to the colonies of the various European nations. They just like got all these colonies in America and in the Caribbean. And what they wanted to do was to fill those colonies up with people who they could use as slave laborers. So we all know that history there, and we're all aware of the brutal displacement that came as a result of that. We're all aware of the deaths, the millions of people who didn't even make the journey through the Middle Passage. We're all very aware of those stories. And so, those were at least 350 years of the most harrowing times in our history. And as I said, during that time, our history was rewritten as well. And so we have to do the digging now to find out the truth of our history. And, we shouldn't shy away from doing those works at all. So very importantly, what we must remember as well is that over those 350 years on the plantation, our African brothers and sisters, although we were reduced to a subhuman status, we fought on those plantations. We made the system of enslavement unmanageable. We forced them eventually to have to abolish the system of slavery. So in 1833, when the Slavery Abolition Act was finally introduced, it wasn't because, Europeans suddenly grew in consciousness and in humanity, and therefore decided that, they're going to start recognizing us as the original humans and give us the status that we deserve. No, that wasn't the reason why slavery was actually abolished. It was abolished because we had some courageous, outstandingly courageous African brothers and sisters who said that they would rather die fighting for their freedom than live a life as an enslaved person. And we have to give thanks to them. We have to thank those ancestors of ours, that fought the liberation battles and wars, who fought for slavery to be abolished. And eventually it was. 1833 marked the end of centuries of rebellions and campaigning and petitioning. It was a wicked time in our history. But just imagine, family, if our ancestors didn't actually fight the great fight. Just imagine if they decided that they would just accept the situation as it was. Sometimes we look at the battles that we've got to fight today, and we think that, it's impossible to make the changes that we want to see. But imagine, during that era of our enslavement, imagine, our brothers and sisters in chains, staring down the barrel of guns and cannons and being used and abused and flogged and whipped in the way they were. Imagine how courageous they would have had to have been to fight during those times. We are so thankful to them that they did, because as a result of their fight, it marked a crucial turning point in terms of the legislation. And we know, even though slavery was abolished in 1833, it didn't immediately mean that all the Africans got their freedom. But, you know, eventually we did. And we are where we are today because of the bravery of those ancestors of ours. So today, you know, on the 26th of May, 2024, you know, we celebrate, you know, those great ancestors of ours who made that sacrifice. So it was the Africans that ended slavery. We were the people who played the pivotal role in fighting against our enslavement and forced the hand of the powers that be at the time to have to dismantle the institute of slavery. They didn't want it to end. They had all that free labor. We were making them rich. You know, they were rich beyond measure from all of the cocoa and the cotton and the sugar and everything else that they were enslaving us to have to produce. You know, it was the revolts, it was the insurrections, you know, that instilled fear into them, that made their management and domination over us unmanageable and uncontrollable. And these are important lessons for our history. And it's so important for us to know what it took for us to win our freedom. Because, you know, some people think, oh, it just took one or two white people to stand up in the Houses of Parliament and say, look, these people are human. You know, where is our humanity? We must, you know, bring about the change that we want to see. It's not going to happen. You know, it's not going to happen. We just need to look at what's happening in Palestine today to know that pretty words isn't going to bring about, you know, stopping the campaign against the Palestinians by the Israelis. You know, it's just not going to happen in that way. So we had to organize and we had to make them believe that they couldn't even sleep in those plantation houses, you know, in the fear that it would be burnt down around them with them in it and their family in it as they slept. I mean, this is how dark, you know, the revolts actually got for us as a people to win our freedom. No sooner, I mean, it was been what, 7 years of the 1883, yeah, within 5 years of the 1883 Slavery Abolition Act, they passed the Compensation Act in Parliament within 5 years. The so-called plantation owners who were enslaving us were compensated for what they described as a loss of their property. Can you believe that? Not the victims of those heinous acts were not the ones who were compensated. No, they compensated the plantation owners. And of course, when you understand that those very same plantation owners were either lords or in the House of Lords or MPs in the House of Commons, or their family members were, then you can understand why it was that the British plantation owners were paid 20 million pounds, which at the time was 40% of the national treasury. 40% of all the money that they had in the country went to those few plantation owners for what they described as loss of their property, you know, and we still haven't been paid as the descendants of the victims until this day, but we continue to campaign. So the fight for reparations, we march here and we congregate and we organize in the UK, in Brixton on the 1st of Mosiah, which is the 1st of August every year, as a reminder that we, the descendants of those who were kidnapped, you know, are still demanding their payments, our payments. We're demanding our reparations. And, you know, the extent of the debt, the extent of the amount of money that was paid to those plantation owners was such that Britain only finished paying for it in 2015. That means during my working lifetime, you know, my taxes were contributing towards repaying the descendants of those plantation owners. Wow. Well, as we know, the Western world, profited enormously from those years of our enslavement. And the legacy of our enslavement continues through to this day in terms of the substantial wealth that was accumulated by those countries that had us enslaved and that their descendants continue to enjoy today. And also the finances and the income that they got from our enslavement financed the infrastructure, their commercial developments, their banks, their insurance companies, their universities, their colleges. Basically, it was the finances that came in from those profitable colonies that financed the development that we see in the Western world today. And by contrast, that era as well contributed towards the downfall and the underdevelopment of Africa itself. And so, we need to be aware of the various sectors within Western society, including the private sector, etc., even the church institutions that benefited enormously from our enslavement. I mean, they made so much money, they are even able to establish the National Health Service that provides healthcare, state-of-the-art healthcare up until today, free of charge to the entire population. Even able to finance all of the drugs that sick people need. Such was the extent of the income that they got from our enslavement and that they continue to reap from us until today. And as I said, the flip side is that it devastated the continent of Africa. Slavery devastated our countries economically, scientifically, infrastructurally, culturally, spiritually. We were devastated. Right, and then we had a situation in 1884, okay, when the Berlin Conference happened. So no sooner had slavery been abolished in 1883, by 1884, the powers that be were sitting around the table at an event that they called the Berlin Conference to partition Africa, to slice up Africa like a piece of cake. And the various European countries, took a part of our precious continent as their own, to rape, to pillage, to exploit. Wow. You see, they had by then been made fully aware of the precious minerals, the gold, the diamonds. They knew how wealthy the continent of Africa actually was. And they were fighting among themselves, to take control of Africa. And the Berlin Conference was designed to actually settle the European rivalry that was happening over which country would have which bits of the continent of Africa. And so this is the Berlin Conference and those who were at it. We, however, went from hundreds of years, about 350 years of enslavement, then into a new era of colonialism. This new era of colonialism was under those countries, those European countries that had taken control of particular countries and nations on the African continent. And as we know, they didn't improve very much the way they dealt with us as Africans under colonialism. They still dehumanized us. They still used us, mainly as a labor force. And they still, worked our people to death almost. It was like, now Africans were enslaved on their own land. So we've moved from the slavery on the plantations to enslavement on the continent itself, and death was rampant. And we were expected to treat them, as our masters. And so colonialism actually lasted for about 80 years. And during that time, you know, those colonial governments just reaped the benefits of the wealth of the land, and they used the funds to build their essential infrastructure. They built their ports, they introduced the cash crop system, the agricultural system. You know, they changed the face of the continent substantially. All the wealth was coming out of Africa and going into Europe and other European countries. And so, you know, that era of 80 plus years or so of colonialism, again, added to the devastating disrepair that, you know, Africa found itself in. So here's a quick slide on the various European colonies that existed following the Berlin Conference. And of course, in addition to France, Britain, Portugal, you had Germany, you had Italy as well. Ethiopia was the only African nation that wasn't colonized. The rest of Africa was basically carved up and distributed to those various European countries. And so, you know, what were we doing as a people in the diaspora about what was happening on the continent? You know, we saw and we knew because our people traveled and they heard and they read about what was going on the continent. We heard about the revolutionary struggles that was happening in Africa. And, you know, there was needed to be a role for the diaspora. And that role for the diaspora was for us to organize ourselves and to have our meetings and our debates and to raise awareness and to express our concern about what was happening on the continent. And so on the 23rd of July, 1900, in Westminster Hall, the diaspora organized the first Pan-African conference. And it was the idea of a brother by the name of Sylvester Williams, who was a young barrister at the time in England. He conceived the idea of having African representatives from all parts of the world coming together to deal with the challenges and the hostilities and the brutalities that we were facing as Africans. And he presented his plan in a letter to a number of distinguished Africans in different countries. And after a favorable reply from them, he went ahead and called a meeting on the 23rd of July in the 1900s, and it was the Pan-African Conference. And the object of that meeting were first to bring into closer touch with each of the peoples between, to bring together people of African descent wherever we were in the world. That was the first and primary objective, so that we all came together in that spirit of oneness. Secondly, it was to inaugurate plans to bring about more friendly relations between the Caucasians and the African races, because at that time, you know, the Pan-Africanist perspective was, well, maybe we can, you know, work with these people, okay? And thirdly, it was about starting a movement and the mobilization of us as Africans who were living abroad to start promoting, you know, our businesses and, you know, the fact that, you know, we are a civilized race as a people, because remember at that time they were still trying to suggest that we were inhuman. And so throughout the history of colonial rule, Africa experienced significant civil unrest, revolutionary struggles. So, for example, we had the Herero people who were fighting against the Germans between 1904 and 1908. They fought a courageous fight, but yes, eventually they were defeated. But, you know, they fought that great fight. They were moved off their own land. They were hunted like animals. Wow. You know, Namibia in the 20th century is now regarded as the first country, it says, to have experienced genocide. We know that there were more genocides before that as well, but this is what, you know, they are writing into history on this. So approximately, it's estimated about 50 to 65,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama people were actually murdered by the German ruling forces in that struggle, that revolutionary struggle. And so we remember all of those ancestors, those fallen soldiers, those men and women, and even probably children as well, who died, fighting for liberation. And then, of course, we had our people who were suffering in the Congo under the atrocities and suffering atrocities under the rule of King Leopold, of Belgium. And it's estimated that at least 10 million Congolese were either mutilated, killed, or died from diseases. And this included children as well. Famine was rife during those times. And then, all the way up to the 1940s, through to the 1960s, we had the anti-colonial rebellions that were happening in numerous African countries, were involved in military battles for change. So for example, in Kenya, you had the Mama uprising led by the Kikuyu people. You had members of the various other ethnic groups as well in Kenya involved in that uprising. This era as well, and this part of our history, again, marked by brutal torture, killings and atrocities that were continued to be committed against us as a people. But our ancestors, our brave warriors, they fought, those colonizers. In Zimbabwe, you had the freedom fighters there as well. Throughout the 60s, you had that nationalist vision for freedom, and that grew into a radical call to overthrow the white minority rule. And you had, the Rhodesian war for independence that was happening there. You also had, in Algeria, the war for independence that was happening in 1954 to 62. That resulted in Algeria getting liberated from the French rule. You had the Angolan War for Independence, 61 to 74. And then you had the Angolans who managed to liberate themselves from the Portuguese. You had the Zanzibar Revolution and the events leading to the Nigerian Civil War as well. So, there were struggles that were happening across the continent to free ourselves from the colonial rule. And, all of that was happening then, it's contributed to shaping to the way things are even today. But then, of course, you had in 1960, you had Ghana, that had managed to abolish the monarchy and become a republic. Yeah, and that was quite significant at the time. South Africa, they had that devastating Sharpeville massacre. And that was the beginning of the turning point against apartheid. And the apartheid movement just grew into full force as a result of that massacre as well. And by the 1960s, because of all of these revolutionary struggles, 17 African countries gained their independence. Wow. So let's look over to the chat. Rise up, Mundele. He says, there are not 2,000 distinct languages in Africa because many languages can be subsumed as they derive from the big... Of course, yes. Yeah, we know Africa is the mother of all languages. Yes, indeed. Okay. Is this live, says New Yard City. Yes, we are live. Mikey Simba says, same system also paid in Zimbabwe. Yes, indeed. And they had the Chemerenge Wars as well in their fight for freedom in Zimbabwe. And so right now we just want to rise up some of those in the diaspora who were fighting in the diaspora, so there was activism happening in Britain amongst the diaspora at the same time that our brothers and sisters were fighting those wars for independence. And so if you remember, we look back to 1900 when there was that first meeting, or that first Pan-African Association meeting that was held in London. It would have been a time when Marcus Mosiah Garvey as well, when his movement, was gaining huge momentum as well. He was doing a vast amount of work, not just in Britain, but also in America and in the Caribbean, you know, and his messages reached Africa as well. And so, you know, what was that message? That it was an ideological message. It was a vision, you know, and it was the vision, you know, that fueled the minds of those freedom fighters. Because if you're going to fight, you need to know what you're fighting for, you know. And so it was the work of the activists, you know, in Britain and America, you know, in partnership with our brothers and sisters on the continent, that developed, you know, the ideology around unity, freedom, liberation. You had Amy Ashford Garvey, a phenomenal organizer. She opened nightclubs and restaurants, and she used those restaurants and nightclubs for meetings to happen, you know, in the UK. And she was, you know, in the heart of London. We had CLR James from Trinidad here in the UK working with the Pan-Africanists in Britain. Alice Kinloch, Henry Sylvester Williams. We had T.E.S. Scholes, Felix Hercules, John Archer, David Walker, George Padmore, Harold Moody, Una Marson, so many. And we also had Nnamdi Azikiwe when he was in Britain. He was a Nigerian independent freedom fighter as well, and a leader who was a campaigner for independence around that time. And, you know, he was leading young people in particular, you know, against what was happening at that time. And he carried his message and his arguments to Britain as well. And he went on to become the first president of Nigeria. And so Britain was seen as a place and a space and a hub where, you know, the anti-colonial message needed to be heard. Britain was seen as a space and a place for political activism against the colonial structures, you know, that was impeding and constraining and strangling, you know, the nations on the continent. So, you know, our ancestors recognized the important contribution that they needed to be making towards that struggle for freedom. And so what they did together is that they pushed the ideas of African solidarity. They pushed the idea of African unity amongst us as a people, and they extended the idea of African unity and solidarity to the whole continent. And it was about the continent and the diaspora coming together as one. It wasn't about the, you know, just sub-Saharan Africa, for example. No, we were all fighting the fight together. There were those in the belly of the beast, so to speak, in the heart of Britain, and there were those on the motherland, on the continent itself. And we, in the heart of the beast, fought the fight at a political, intellectual kind of level, through organization and through their legal institutions. And we use their legal instruments as well to bring our arguments and to bring our case against the situation that our family were experiencing on the continent under colonial rule. So in September of the 1900s, a letter was even sent to Queen Victoria by a group of African British delegates. And it says, and at that time, in the documents, it says that Victoria actually responded personally, instructing her private secretary, who was Arthur Bigg at the time, to write in response to the letter that our people had written to her, expressing concern about the way that our people were being treated by the white people in South Africa and the country that they called Rhodesia. And there's a copy of that letter on file that you can look up as part of the history. So that there is a note from the actual letter itself. So as I was saying, you know, in the UK, there was the rise of the Black revolutionaries. We had Marcus Mosiah Garvey as an activist, and he founded the largest mass movement in British Black history. It wasn't even just British history, in Caribbean history, American history at that time, the largest universal organization of us as Africans. And, you know, he came from Jamaica to the UK, then on to the USA, came back to Jamaica when he got deported, came back to London in the UK as well. And even today, there is a plaque on the house where he lived in London and from where he worked. And that's at 53 Talgarth Road, Barons Court, W149DD in the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. So if you're in the area, go have a look. So we had the first Pan-African Congress meeting. Then we had the second Pan-African Congress meeting that was held in August and September of 1921. That was held across London, Brussels, and Paris. Just imagine, you know, there were 113 delegates that were represented at that second Pan-African Congress meeting from 26 different countries, and they were echoing, you know, the priority objectives that had been set out in the first Pan-African meeting, reiterating the need for self-governance, independence, you know, liberation from racism and colonialism. And so, you know, we see there a number of women as well who are also very much involved in the revolutionary struggle back then as well. Then we had the third Pan-African Congress meeting in London, in England, and Lisbon, Portugal. And that was in November 1923. This one was called for self-governance and a necessity of addressing whether or not Black people are to be regarded as human beings, potentially the equals of other human beings. Imagine having to have that discussion and that debate, and how dehumanizing it must have been, you know, for those Black professors and lawyers and all of those other, because there was a lot of middle-class Black people at that time in Britain who were conscious, who understood themselves, you know, having to debate and argue about being regarded as and recognized as human beings, and having to fight for that. We don't have to fight today to be recognized as human beings, because, you know, those ancestors of ours, they did that fight for us, and we thank them. So that was one of the major debates that was happening in November 1923 at the third Pan-African Congress. Then we had the fourth Pan-African Congress. That one was held in New York City in 1927. There were 10 countries that were represented there, other than the United States, and Africa was represented by delegates, and Africa was represented by delegates from Nigeria, Liberia, the Gold Coast, Sierra Leone. This is awesome. You know, and this was due to the fact that the British and French colonial powers had imposed travel restrictions. Had they not, there would have been a lot more countries represented. So what are we hearing here? We're hearing and we're realizing such was the fear of the European powers about these Pan-African conferences that were happening, that they imposed travel restrictions to inhibit and to prevent Pan-African gatherings. Wow. So, you know, this fourth one was made up mainly of representatives from the United States because of the ban. However, you know, we were still able to get delegates from various African countries to attend those meetings. And so from that, you know, you can see that our ancestors believed in the importance of us as the diaspora, you know, meeting and speaking and shaping our ideas in partnership with our brothers and sisters on the continent. Yeah. And it's beautiful that it's still happening until today. You know, this is why I just love my Pan-African brothers and sisters on the continent when they come on my radio shows or on my YouTube shows, because, you know, we're coming together in that spirit of oneness, ideologically, spiritually, you know, and we're going forward then after these gatherings and these meetings and these discussions with a similar kind of mindset. Following on from the fourth Pan-African Congress, there was the fifth one that was mainly organized by Amy Ashwood Garvey. This one happened in 1845. You know, our revolutionary freedom fighters, remember I told you, were fighting the great fight on the battlefield, but while they were fighting the great fight on the battlefield, we as Africans in the diaspora, we were fighting the great fight, in their political institutions. We were fighting the great fight in their intellectual institutions. And we were organizing conferences and events, and reaching out to our brothers and sisters on the continent to join, in these ideological meetings. And they would do, and then they would go back on the continent and organize the working class through the trade unions, through whatever movements they could, to join the great fight. Back then, it was mainly the black middle class that had the high level of education. Some of them even went to university at Oxford and Cambridge. Some of them were lawyers and doctors, but they were all very much as intellectuals involved in the struggle. And that conference that Amy Ashford Garvey organized was it looks like in Manchester, and it was dominated by delegates from Africa and Africans working or studying in Britain. Wow. And this is what a bit of history as well that we need to talk about much more. The fact that there were a lot of Africans in Britain already at that time. Some were studying, some were doing business here, some had maybe lived here for centuries, but there were many Africans already in Britain at that time. And this is prior to the Windrush, yeah? So, as I said, the Fifth Pan-African Congress, largely organized by Amy Ashford Garvey and Amy Jakes Garvey. They were the two wives of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, not at the same time, one than the other. And they were a major force for decolonization. And their work and campaigning involved and included Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, as the trade unions were strongly represented at those Pan-African Congresses. You had Du Bois, who was from America, and he believed once that Ghana, once Ghana was independent, then the next Pan-African Congress would take place in Ghana. But after Ghana declared independence in 1957, Du Bois found himself unable to travel because the United States government impounded him. You see, they realized and they recognized the power of the diaspora and the Africans working together ideologically around the same, agenda, that the vision and the political ideology, is critical, because once everybody has got that vision, then everybody fights, together, to achieve a common goal and objective. So anyway, Du Bois wasn't able to travel. And so as a result, in April 1958, the All African People's Conference in Accra was organized instead by Kwame Nkrumah and George Padmore. The revolutionary struggles of the founding fathers, continued dramatically through the 1940s, 50s to the 1960s. And in 1960, during that year, as I said, Ghana had abolished the monarchy and had become a republic. South Africa saw the devastating, as I said, so there's a lot that was happening during that year. This slide, I think we've already seen most of the contents of this slide. And in 1969, former French colonies became independent. Benin, Niger, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Chad, Central African Republic, the Republic of Congo, Gabon, and Senegal. So we can see that by 1960, the fight, the struggle, the lobbying, the campaigning, the organizing, the revolutionary struggles on the continent, the lives that were lost, by 1960, it appeared, was not in vain, because, all those countries, 17 countries, at first gained their independence. And by August, 9 of those countries were the former French colonies. By the 1960s, freedom and liberation, that's what was coming off of the lips. That's what was in the heart of the people. That's what the campaigns were all about. That's what the struggles were all about. Freedom, liberation, emancipation from, physical bondage and mental enslavement. This was high on the agenda. By 1963, 25th of May 1963, in Addis Ababa, 32 African states that had achieved independence at that time agreed to establish the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, with the main aim of bringing the African nations together and resolving the issues within the continent. 32 heads of the newly independent African states signed the charter, creating Africa's first post-independence continental institution, the Organization of African Unity. And this is what we're celebrating here today. Kwame Nkrumah, Muammar Gaddafi, Haile Selassie were one of the founding fathers as well. And Haile Selassie was the first chair of the OAU. And what was the aim of the OAU? Freedom from colonialism. Yes, indeed. Okay, next slide. Come on, oh, it takes so long to go to the next slide. Okay, this next slide is the name that everyone in the Gambia ought to know. And not just in the Gambia, but beyond as well. Family, drop me a message in the chat. Let me know, how you're receiving this presentation. I'd love to hear from you. So Aliyu Ibrahima Chamju. Wow. He was commonly known as Chamju or Al-Haji, and his pen name was Al-A Chamju. He was a Gambian historian, politician, author, trade unionist, broadcaster, radio program director, scoutmaster, Pan-Africanist, lecturer, columnist, activist, and an African nationalist who advocated for Gambia's independence during the colonial era. Everyone should know his name. And in May 1963, at the OAU conference, this great Gambian historian, this great Gambian Pan-Africanist said the following. He said, "It is barely 75 years when the European powers sat around the table in Germany, each holding a dagger to carve up Africa for its own benefit. Your success will inspire and speed up the freedom and total independence of the African continent and eradicate imperialism and colonialism from the continent and eventually neocolonialism from the globe. Your failure, however, which no true African in Africa is praying for, will prolong our struggle with bitterness and disappointment. I therefore adjure that you ignore any suggestion outside Africa and holding that the present civilization, which some of the big powered are boasting of, sprang up from Africa, and realizing that the entire world has something earthly to learn from Africa. You would endeavor your utmost to come to agreement, save Africa from the clutches of neocolonialism, and resurrect African dignity, manhood, and national stability." So we know from that speech that at the time, there were moves behind the scenes, from the big powers that be, who were boasting as though they were the originators of civilization, and suggesting to the African countries that they need Europe. You need us. We're the civilized nations. You need us. You can't run Africa without us. Keep us on board as friends. And he was appealing to them to ignore those voices, ignore those outside influences, and that for Africans to come together in unity, to do the works that it needed to do in order to advance its independence. Kwame Nkrumah's position was similar as well. He was passionate about African unity. He understood the importance of it. as a Pan-Africanist, he knew the importance of solidarity. He knew the importance of us as Africans coming together everywhere against colonialism and racism. He studied alongside, CLR James Padmore. He would have known, and did know Marcus Garvey's wives. They schooled each other. They were at the forefront of developing, this whole ideological thinking, and they were walking in the footsteps of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was also championing, Black independence from a position of power, not from a power of weakness. And so he was appealing also to the African continent, to come together, in unity and in strength. And he was opposed to the continued subjugation of millions of Africans to the colonial or white settler rule in the Portuguese colonies, the southern Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, Southwest Africa, now Namibia. Not only was he concerned about what was happening in his own country, Ghana, he was also very concerned about what was happening globally. And so, as a passionate believer in African unity, he did what he could, to actually finance those countries who were fighting a liberation struggle at the time. And he identified with Ethiopia as a historic African state, and that managed to remain independent. He promoted solidarity amongst the people, and he was pushing for change. And he wanted that change to come sooner rather than later. And as we know, as a result of all of that activism that was happening between 1957 and 1963, a significant number of African countries did actually get their independence. And but what he also wanted was for the diaspora to continue to play a prominent role in the promotion of Pan-Africanism. Sadly, sort of after that era, those links seem to have dissipated a bit, kind of fizzled out. But, maybe to some extent, those revolutionary freedom fighters of the 40s and 50s felt that by the 60s, they'd achieved their goal. African countries were now independent. They were coming together in unity and in strength, and they were now going to be charting and seeking to chart, their independence as sovereign nations. And those countries that were yet to become independent, those that were independent, continued to support their struggle. And there was a lot happening, and it was decision time. How were these revolutionary African countries going to go forward? Yeah, they had suffered almost 400 years, at the hands of the Europeans, and now, their independence was on the doorstep, and many countries had already achieved independence by 1960. And Europe and America, they were trembling because it looked as though, African unity was happening, and the prospect of that unity meant the likelihood of them losing control over being able to access the resources of Africa. It meant that, they might not be able to continue to exploit those African countries in the way that they had been, and that they would have to disentangle themselves from being the controllers and the powerful ones behind some of those countries. So, these were some of the conversations that they would have been plotting and scheming behind the scenes, and they would have been trying to influence some of those African countries to, not go completely independent all at once, but to maintain contact, to maintain, relations with the West. And these people are such chameleons. When they want to, smile with you and offer you money and try and make out that they're friends of yours, they can do a good job. So by 1961, it was the crossroads. The dilemma, was on the one hand, the pro-African radical approach to foreign policy that was adopted by the Casablanca Group. They wanted to cut ties with the West. They were advocating African unity. They wanted Africa to be totally liberated from the clutches of the West. But then you also had, on the other hand, a number of countries that were pro-West. And they were called, and they sat in the, were called the Monrovia Group. And they were more conservative. And they were saying, you know, maybe we should take the slow road. Maybe we shouldn't go for all-out total liberation all at once, you know? So on one hand, at the time, the Casablanca Group, at the meeting in Moroccan City, you had Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, you had President Ahmed from Guinea, you had, who was under Sékou Touré, you had the presidents of, who led president? I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. You also had Egypt, who was part of the Casablanca group as well. And on the other hand, in a meeting that was held in Monrovia, the slow group, that was being led by the more conservative pro-Western states at the time. And these groups included Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, whose radicalism actually resembled Nkrumah, but who advocated moves towards unity within regions as a first step. And Kwame Nkrumah, you know, sadly became isolated in the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group. I think, you know, there was the speculation that he wanted to be the president of all Africa, and, you know, and so he lost support. And I suppose that narrative was probably pushed, you know, by those outside of Africa who wanted to sow seeds of division, you know, within Africa itself. And so, you know, you had the two bodies, the two main camps. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, as we know, the Monrovia, the Go Slow group, won the vote at the end of the day. And that was the beginning, sadly, most of us think, of the opportunity that Africa had to totally unite and rid itself of the Western powers, because it made the wrong decision at the crossroads. Rather than adopt the collective approach, they adopted this individualistic approach because they all wanted to be the kings of their own kingdoms. They didn't have that empire mentality. They wanted to seize the opportunity and the experience of leadership at the time. And as a result of that, from then till now, almost, we've experienced 66 more years of neocolonialism. So from that meeting at 1958 until now, it's 66 years of neocolonialism. Imagine 66 years ago, after having suffered 75 years of colonialism, 66 years ago, we had the opportunity to rid ourselves, had they heeded the warning and embraced the motion that the Casablanca group was actually pushing at the time. Wow. So what happened as a result of neocolonialism? You know, you had your 14 African countries that had been colonized by France, basically back under the control, the colonial control of France. Post-independence kind of morphed into neocolonialism because the Europeans, they seemed to, at independence, go out the front door. You know, African countries were given a flag, they were allowed to elect a leader, but those Europeans came back in the back door. Why? Because they never gave up foreign control of our economies, our financial systems, our education system, you know, our legal system. They had technical control as foreign powers. And so they had the ability to make decisions impacting on our policies. And so, you know, for those 14 African countries, my, France maintained monetary control through the CFA franc. They imposed strict regulatory conditions on their francophone countries, you know, and in 2020, it was actually reported that the French Treasury held around 9.5 billion euros of foreign exchange reserves that belonged to those 14 African countries. And remember, you know, many of these African countries were in debt to the tune of tens of millions. About 9.5 billion in euros was actually being held in their French treasuries that belong to those countries, and it would have taken those countries, the way things were, over 50 years, to have accumulated that amount of money. And imagine the amount of interest that was being earned off that money. Was it going back into the coffers of the African countries and those 14 African nations? No, it wasn't. In February 2020, a letter entitled "President Macron, it's time to let go of your outdated African policies," it stated. For more than 50 years, the citizens of 14 Francophone countries in Africa are using an outdated French monetary system. They pay the price of it with their democratic rights and wealth, leaving their own countries in poverty, whereas France is still benefiting from a joint currency they introduced during the colonial times. It's about time for change. Rise up, Moena Memoragu Kutomin, who wrote that article. And of course, we have our great mother of Africa as well, Mama Africana Quayo, Chibori Quayo, who dynamically, put the situation of those 14 African countries and the extent to which France had a stranglehold around the neck of those countries out there into the public domain in such a way that everyone was able to get it. And it just, the importance again, of having the political, the intellectual, the media, and the diaspora, involved in the struggle for independence. And so, during those 66 years of neocolonialism, poverty levels on the African continent continued to worsen and rise. There was unfair trade deals. The continent experienced wars, famines, from one crisis to the next, diseases, AIDS and Ebola, inadequate agricultural infrastructural development, lack of industrial development, and the list goes on. Terrorist activity all over various parts of Africa, the Cold Wars that were happening on the continent to oost out those revolutionary leaders. I mean, the Europeans, they were turning the continent upside down, and at the same time, forcing Africa into a state of impoverishment, hunger, and the sad thing is that then those famines and the starvation that was happening and the undernourishment of the children made Africa, the begging bowl of the world. The rest of the world started seeing Africa, because of all those Cold Wars that were happening, the assassinations, the coups, the overthrows, because we hadn't come together in unity, and these people were able to infiltrate, our African continent. It became, the continent with the highest rate of malnutrition worldwide. It was seen as the begging bowl of the world, where 30% of the children were suffering from all sorts of growth disorders and chronic, diseases and sicknesses and underdevelopment. Africa, which should have been a shining star had they come together under the Casablanca plan, on an individual basis, one country after another, failed, in its ability to be able to manage the countries because of the external, undermining to destabilize the efforts of Africa to grow. The mortality rates on the continent became the highest anywhere, in the world. Wow, on average, 1 in 11 children was dying before their 5th birthday. 3 of the 4 countries with the highest infant mortality were African countries as well. The statistics about sub-Saharan Africa and the millions of our children who were suffering, was known to the world. Inadequate education facilities, inadequate health facilities, inadequate farming to feed our people. We were being slaughtered from so many different directions, and it was so easy for the outside forces to do it because they worked together in unity. They worked together as a unit to undermine Africa's growth and development. And there we were as 54 tiny little countries, trying to fight off, these bullies in the world. 25 million Africans at one time infected with HIV/AIDS. And we're all very familiar with the origins of these viruses and what that was all about. 2.9 million children actually died or lost one or both parents as a result of the AIDS. So, the country was being devastated through health policies, educational policies, inadequate infrastructural development, external interference in political affairs, assassinations, coups. I mean, the onslaught was relentless. So post-colonial times, we saw economic instability, high rates of unemployment, inequality. The Institute for Security Studies stated at one time that 30 million or more Africans fell into extreme poverty, living on less than $1.9 a day. COVID broke out, and that brought serious problems on the continent as well. There's lack of access to water. We could have our 101 reasons that they can tell us why Africa was in the state that it was. But really, the decision that we made at the crossroads was the wrong decision. The Monrovia slow road to change was the wrong decision. When we find ourselves at a crossroad again, will we be making the right decision? By the 1960s, as you know, we've come a long way as a people. But, 30 years on, it's estimated that the continent received 1.2 trillion in aid, unevenly distributed across the continent. But the continent became a continent that needed aid to survive, or that was the narrative. Despite 1.2 trillion in aid, the rise in living standards was almost non-existent. When you compared the economic growth that was happening in other countries like Asia, South Korea, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Bangladesh during the same period, But what happened during that time is that single story narrative about Africa being the begging bowl of the world, showing images of the Biafran children during the Biafran War, are the images that are even still, they still attempt to push on the minds of us in the diaspora until today. It's only because in the last 20 years or so, Africans from the diaspora have been traveling to Africa and have been at the forefront of changing that narrative in the picture of Africa, why, most of us sees through that single story today, yeah? And, but the aid agencies and the charities, the British charities, the American charities, and the other European charities around the world benefit hugely, from peddling that image of Africa. And, they became, multi-billion pounds or multi-billion dollar charity industries. And they controlled Africa as well through their aid agencies, through organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, all designed to stunt Africa's development and growth. And so, all sorts of reasons were being given for Africa's underdevelopment. But we know that there was more to it than that. There were betrayals, there were assassinations, there were coups. According to Wikipedia, there were over 150 murders or assassinations, suicides of prominent African leaders that were influenced by outside forces to enable those former colonialists to maintain control and dominance in their former colonies. These people, they didn't sleep. They didn't sleep at all. Okay, family, yeah, feel free to message me in the chat as well. Now and again, I will jump to your comments. So I can see Mikey Simba in there with a comment, and he says, same system also paid in Zimbabwe. I think that might be the compensation system that our brother's referring to there. where I know at one time there was a proposal to pay, the land thieves compensation for giving back the land to the people. I mean, I wonder where our head is sometimes. Anyway, despite all of the coups, the assassination attempts, etc., we still had our revolutionary freedom fighters who were fighting to save the continent. Even when Europe was on the verge of reclaiming Africa, we were there fighting to try and maintain control. Europe, all these coups that were controlled by outsiders, orchestrated by outsiders, was their effort, their covert effort to destabilize our continent, and so that they can continue to rule, and at the same time, blame our leaders for the downfall of the continent. But they wouldn't have been successful if they didn't have the treasonous, treacherous leaders, amongst us who would work with them. They would not have been successful. Let's rise up one of our greats, Kwame Nkrumah, who had a Pan-African vision that we've already touched on as well. And he was, one of our founding fathers who was at the forefront of the vision for Africa. And he was saying, the vision wasn't just for Ghana, but it was for the whole of Africa, to become a powerhouse, to become a beacon of pride, to stand shoulder to shoulder in terms of status, as any other so-called first world country. That's what he was about. His vision was for the future of Africa. And, what he managed to accomplish in a short space of time when he was president of Ghana is a testimony as to what we can do if we're left alone. Let me just flash up some of his accomplishments. This included the Adomi Bridge, the Akosmombo Dam. We became self-sufficient. He developed a self-sufficient industrial city of Temba that was built around the Temba Harbor, the University of Science. He authored 12 books. He left behind a legacy and a blueprint for us. Let me flash up some more of his achievements. These are some of the schools, colleges, and universities that were built during Kwame Nkrumah's reign. Hospitals, teaching hospitals, clinics, health centers, medical centers, hospitals. He was building factories. He built a glass factory, meat factory. He built a tomato factory in Ghana, match factory. He introduced textile factories, shoe factories. Look at all the factories that he built during his time. Ships, airplanes. This was a man on a mission. He expanded and introduced the Ghana film industry in Accra, the airways corporations in Ghana. He was light years ahead of many of the other countries at the time. It's as if he knew his time was limited. He was marketing Ghana's cocoa abroad, and he set up the Ghana National Trading Corporation. This is what was happening during his term of presidency, and there was so much more as well. He had, hotels built. He introduced catering, restaurant houses, and in Kumasi, and built news agencies, broadcasting corporations, even an atomic reactor station. He restructured his military as well. What a man, what a man. This is what a progressive leader is all about, and what a progressive leader can accomplish if they are left alone to do the works in building and developing their country. But of course, Britain didn't want that to happen. They had to put out the light of Kwame Nkrumah. But the good thing is, Kwame Nkrumah has left the blueprint, and he's done it, and he's made us aware that we can make great strides. Even though the enemies might be on our tail, if we work together as a people, and do the best we can, we certainly can, make some great strides. But unfortunately, we always have the traitors, the treacherous ones in our midst. And he had, he was surrounded by politicians and lawyers and even his own foreign affairs ministers, etc. Those who became known as the Big Six, who subsequently contributed towards the overthrowing of Kwame Nkrumah. They took over the government of Ghana, jumped in the bed with the colonizers, and just continued to operate at a treacherous level. And even until today, we have the descendants of one of those treasonous ones ruling Ghana today. Here are the faces of the men who betrayed Kwame Nkrumah. And at this point, what I really want to do is refer you to the works of Leader Bandaka, who has been a regular guest on my YouTube channel. He did a fantastic series on the coups and assassinations throughout our history. And he did one on the coup that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah's government. And he identified these army officials and police as well as being instrumental in that coup. And so, these are the traitors. We have to learn also about these traitors, who are in positions of power, sometimes on our own doorstep, who then turn around and work with the enemy, to overthrow our great leaders. Look at what he was accomplishing. Rise up the works of Brother Leader Bandaka. Please go to my YouTube channel and just search for Leader Bandaka's shows, and you will find some great, powerful educational videos that he's done for us on that channel. And he continues to be a special guest on the Sista Shanice show as well. How do we know that these people were actually involved in the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah? Well, in 2009, CIA papers came into the public domain. And in those papers, it actually talked about how they were planning to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah and the conversations that they were having in the White House back in February 1964. We can see from those papers that in terms of the planning, the British Prime Minister at the time was involved, his Foreign Secretary was involved, the US President was involved. And what was the crime of Kwame Nkrumah? Why were they planning to overthrow him? Because he wanted to liberate his people and operate and function as a sovereign, independent country. They couldn't allow that to happen. So yeah, go to my YouTube channel, family, and actually search through the videos from Leader Bandaka. He goes into depth and he produces the references, factual documents, the evidence of these manipulations and maneuverings by the foreign agencies, and our own people that collaborated, to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah and his progressive works. And then we had a similar situation, a really awful situation that faced Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was a courageous freedom fighter, a Congolese politician, and he was the one who went on to become the independence leader when the DRC became independent. And he played a major role in transforming the Congo economy and taking it away from the Belgians. And again, Europeans couldn't allow for him to be successful, but sadly, he had traitors in his midst. And shortly after the Congolese independence in 1960, a mutiny broke out in the army, and that would mark the beginning of the Congo crisis. And even though, Lumumba was appealing around the world for peace, and he was appealing to the US and the United Nations to, not interfere, or if they were to do so constructively, they had their agenda. And as the differences grew between him and those people who were around him, they moved in, arrested Patrice Lumumba, and also Mobutu, and executed him in a firing squad. Wow. And following his assassination, as we know, he was held as a martyr, but it was just wicked. They went on to even, I believe, put his body in acid so that, you know, we couldn't even give him a fitting burial. Wow. We had, and we remember President Sylvanus Olympio. His dream was to build an independent and self-sufficient and self-reliant country. The French didn't like that idea. They didn't like the idea that, you know, he wanted to become self-sufficient, and they refused. And because he refused to sign the colonization pact and remain as one of their lackeys, what they did was they got a squad of soldiers backed by France to go in and murder him. Wow. We remember Maurice Mokolo. Maurice Mokolo was a Congolese politician who served as a Minister of Youth and Sports of the Republic of the Congo in 1960. And he briefly led the Congolese army that July. He was executed alongside Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. Wow. We remember Joseph Okito. Joseph Okito was a Congolese politician as well, and another close political ally of Patrice Lumumba, who briefly served as the first vice president of the Senate of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He was also executed alongside Lumumba in Katanga in 1961. We remember Laurent Desire Kabila, powerful Congolese revolutionary and politician who served as the third president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo when he was overthrown by Mobutu Sese Seko until his assassination in January 2001. We remember him, Kabila. We remember Amilcar Lopez da Costa Cabral. He was the Bissau, Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verdean agricultural engineer, Pan-Africanist, intellectual, poet, theoretician, revolutionary political organizer, nationalist and diplomat. He was one of Africa's foremost anti-colonial leaders. We remember him. He was assassinated on the 20th of January, 1973, about 8 months before Guinea-Bissau's unilateral declaration of independence, that he, you know, was deeply influential and inspirational in the revolutionary independence movement, not just in Guinea-Bissau, but worldwide. We remember him. We remember Thomas Sankara, head of state of Burkina Faso. He was a military officer and revolutionary Pan-Africanist who served as president of Burkina Faso from his coup in 1983 until his assassination in 1987. He left huge footprints as well. On taking office, Sankara's first priorities was feeding, housing, and giving medical care to his people. His people loved him, but the outside forces, in partnership with the corruptible ones in-house, sadly moved in and he was assassinated. Wow. He accomplished so much in his short term of presidency. You know, he successfully implemented programs that vastly reduced infant mortality. He increased literacy rates and school attendance. He boosted the number of women holding governmental posts. He had a conscience for the environment. And in his first year of presidency, he alone saw to the planting of 10 million trees. And this was an effort to combat the deforestation that was happening and diversification. And, you know, he was a powerful leader who was bringing about so much change in the region of Burkina Faso. But as you know, there's a lot happening in Burkina Faso today. We're going to be coming to that in a little while. We remember General Ibrahim Bare Menasara. He was a Nigerian military officer and diplomat who ruled Nigerian who ruled Niger from 1996. And he orchestrated a military coup in 1996 and overthrew Niger's first democratically elected government. and seized power. He subsequently served as president until he was assassinated. We remember President Sekou Touré, whose slogan was, "We prefer freedom in poverty to opulence in slavery." And as you know, in 1958, he drove out the French colonial empire and decided that, they didn't want anything to do with the colonial elite. They were so furious, the French were so furious, that they went in and destroyed everything that they could, everything that they built, everything that they said represented their colonial development and contribution towards the country. They destroyed it. Schools, nurseries, public administration buildings, anything that they couldn't move and take, they totally destroyed it. Cars, books, medicines, research institutions, they destroyed everything. And it was an outrageously attempt to send a clear message to all the other colonies. You dare to reject us as France, and the cost will be extremely high to you and your country. And so, these assassinations and coups I've talked about was just a small part of the hugely impactful part of colonial interference in African affairs. And there are many books that have been written about the impact of 60 years of neocolonialism. And so it's important that we are aware of that part of the history, because it really did lay the foundation as to why we are where we are today, So after, about 350 years of our enslavement, and then the abolition of slavery, and then about 75 years of colonialism. And then after that, when we won our independence, because we didn't come together in unity and as a powerful force in oneness, but we decided to go it as individual kingdoms, we suffered another 66 years of neo-colonialism. And so, our revolutionary greats, who were the ones at the forefront of fighting for our independence, they at that time were clear about what they wanted, but there were those, who came in and rode the waves of, the great fight and the great struggle, and decided that they wanted to work with the West instead. And as we say, the rest is history. We have been impacted now for well over 60 years. We see in the news as we come up to date, the efforts of so many of our young people who flee, the impoverished conditions that they're faced with on the continent, even losing their lives, because their country is so undeveloped, because of the constant destabilization and external interference that their country suffers, they want to search for greener pastures, and many end up at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. And we are very aware of the really awful, inhumane policies that the European Union has shown towards, the Africans who have fled and are coming in those boats. They would rather pay, the Libyan warlords and criminals to keep the Africans in Libya in the most inhumane way and treat them appallingly, murder them, do whatever. They don't care. They'll pay Tunisia, pay Morocco, pay Libya, pay all these Arab countries that are the invaders of that part of Africa to keep the Africans there and to stop them from crossing the waters to come into their country, rather than, allow the Africans to come to the place where all of their money and all their riches and the resources were, to come to the place, and the land of the country of those who are putting them through the horrors that they have put them through, And so when you look at some of the countries that we're homing in on today, when you looked at them a little while ago, Niger, you have Mohamed Bazoum, Burkina Faso, Belize Compaoré, you had Senegal's Macky Sall, you had Mali's Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, all being controlled by France. The history of the political interference that we've been talking about for the last 60 plus years from France and Britain, in the same way towards its colonies on the African continent, widely known. Post-colonialism and the struggle for independence resulted in countries like France being able to remove the revolutionary freedom fighters, and today, or yesterday, I should say, end up with the sort of leaders who they totally control. But then there was a new breed of leaders, wasn't there? A new breed of leaders who decided, of young revolutionaries who decided enough is enough. And these young, courageous revolutionaries with the mind for freedom and independence, who were fed up of seeing their older statesmen sleeping at these meetings, sleeping when they should be, arguing, to save the continent, when they should be negotiating favorable deals. They're at the meeting sleeping. When they should be reading through contracts, they're signing them, even if they're in different languages, and they don't even understand what they're signing. And so these revolutionary leaders have come in and they've taken back their country, and they're in the process of disentangling themselves from France, and they are charting the way to restoring Africa back to its former greatness, and so these are revolutionary times. For the last 60 years, we've been watching, our leaders get toppled. We've been calling on unity, and our African countries haven't been able to come together in meaningful unity. And so outside forces have continued to undermine and destabilize and to exploit, but what we're beginning to see now from these four brother states is what the Kwame Nkrumah and those of the Casablanca bloc were talking about, the importance of unity. So this is the difference between those who have a kingdom mindset, which is, just a nation building mindset, and those who have an empire mindset, those who are prepared to work in collaboration, with others to form kingdoms and have a kingdom mindset. And here they are now leading the way towards the African dream of true independence. And I tell you, today's African liberation, 2024 liberation, is truly a remarkable year indeed to be celebrating African liberation. So, change is happening on the continent. These young people have been crying for long enough on the deaf ears of those old stooges who only jump to the voices and the tunes of the European paymasters. So now in Niger, the current head of state, we have Abrahamani Tishani. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Toure. Yesterday, I was writing and addressing him as the interim president. Breaking news, as you know, there is change there. I'll come to that in a little while. He was successful in removing Paul Henry Damimba, one of the country's second coup leaders in the last 9 months. And then we've got Senegal's president, Diomaye Faye, who was elected in a very hotly contested set of elections. And, rise up to him and to Sonko, who came together. Sonko threw his weight behind Faye. And now, we have a new young president in Senegal. In Mali, we have Colonel Gota. He assumed office back in May 2021 following a successful coup as well. These were young people, fairly young, on the whole, compared to the ages of African presidents who've decided enough is enough. And to the jubilation and the joy of the people who have been instrumental as well in organizing campaigns through unions, through African organizations as Pan-Africanism, the people themselves, the citizens of population have been instrumental in driving forward these huge anti-government protests against those old stooges, and eventually young people from among them have come and have heard the cries of the people and have taken on the campaigns of the young people who want true independence, who want to stop to foreign exploitation, those young people who want their land back, those young people who want the return of their raw minerals and resources, or for it to be left in the land until they are able to exploit it. Those young people who want to be the business entrepreneurs of tomorrow and want to work for people who look like them, who have businesses, factories and industries, that are giving them jobs and opportunities, improve business prospects. They want peace. They want meaningful steps towards the long overdue change that they had been agitating for decades. Well, now, that mass youth movement we've seen in Senegal, we've seen in Mali, we've seen in Burkina Faso, we've seen in various parts of Africa has begun to bear fruit. And we rise up and continue to rise up, the young people on the continent, the young people of Mali, the young people of Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, and all the young people across the continent who need to be consistent and persistent in demonstrating against their governments who are not operating in the interest of their people, but in the interest of foreign powers. The population can make a difference. Popular support, popular opinions are major significant factors in bringing about progressive change. And we celebrate every young person on the African continent that has been involved in any of these protests against the old stooges who were eating out of the pockets and the hands of their former colonial masters, and for the demonstrations that you participated on that led to the bringing about of the change in regime and the coups and the new coup leaders who are seemingly responding from a pro-African perspective as opposed to a pro-Western compromise position. These are new days. So we want to rise up. Our brother Tashani, the president, interim president there of Niger. We welcome him onto the scene as one of the new breed of revolutionary freedom fighters. We celebrate you this African Liberation Day time. We celebrate you in the name of all of our freedom fighters, those whose names we've remembered and those we've not had time to mention today because of time. There's so many unsung heroes we have. History is littered with tens of thousands of great ones, and your name will be remembered in history. And we certainly hope that you continue, to support, your country to bring about the changes that is needed. Because after decades under France, with so little benefit, and with so many people in Niger suffering, we are delighted that this move and this coup has happened, which has unshackled, still in the process of unshackling Niger from imperialist control. 49 African countries sent delegations to the very timely second Russia-African summit. I think we all remember that Expo event very, very well. And it was at that summit in July last year that numerous African leaders delivered their heartfelt speeches to the members of that summit. And they walked away with the support of Russia and with the support of each other. And, there was a new form of comradeship, a solidarity, a unity that had been built between a number of African leaders. And Niger walked away with the support of Russia, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And, what was the situation facing Niger? Why, a coup was necessary. The Nigerians were living in poverty, ranked 167 out of 169 countries for the United Nations Humanitarian Development. And according to their index in 2010, Niger was one of the poorest and least developed countries in the world. Now, according to Ambassador Ramayade, she made these remarks. She said, and at the time she was still is, I think, the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center who previously served as France's ambassador to UNESCO. In an interview with NPR, Scott Simon, she said, on the military front, Niger has had a very important role in the counterterrorism strategy led by France, the US, and the rest of Europe. She said that Bazoum, who was ousted as president of Niger last month, at the time when she was speaking, was the last strongman of the Sahel, supported by the West, firstly in their fight against terrorism, and secondly in the resistance to Russia. So we know what that means. Yeah, Bazoum was the man that the West needed and wanted, leaned on and relied on to allow them to continue with this pathetic fight against terrorism that they were losing on a daily basis, you know, that was costing Africa dearly, and also to resist Russia. And she said on the economic front, Niger is also important. It's also important to understand that Niger is a very rich country where you can find a lot of resources, very important for energy power. For example, Niger's uranium. But hang on a minute, how can Niger be so rich when our beautiful children, you know, are sitting on the classroom floor for lessons because, you know, they don't have a state-of-the-art education center as they should have if their country is so rich, where they are 167 out of 169 countries in terms of, you know, being the poorest in the world. Like, what's going on? You know, how could that be the case, that this country is so rich? So let's have a look at what Niger is actually rich in. Niger produces about 5% of the world's uranium output, providing Africa's largest and highest grade of uranium ore. In 2000, it produced 2,020 tons of uranium in 2022. And although that estimate is going down, it still represents high levels of mineral output. So the mineral mining industry, absolutely crucial to Niger's economy, according to this report. Why? Because from Niger, they were exporting what consisted of about 40% of Niger's exports in minerals and mining. 40% of Niger's economy was the export of mineral commodities. The mineral commodities produced in Niger include cement, coal, gypsum, limestone, salt, silver, tin, uranium. Now in 2006, Niger was the world's 4th ranked producer of uranium. Niger's mineral sector accounted for just 3% of GDP. How can you be exporting 40% of your minerals and it only accounts for 3% of GDP? You know, and not, you know, 40% or higher, considering the level of exports. Then comes in, you know, institutions like the IMF, you know, that deliberately reduces, you know, Africa's monetary value. So here we have, you know, outside foreign interests, you know, over and above African interests, and the demand for uranium, you know, that was expanding the development of countries like France. So it's at the same time, you know, doing very little for the GDP of Niger. 2008 to 2012, it was projected that this French-owned company that had investments in the uranium mines would be earning about 1.4 billion, which would double the country's uranium production capacity. It should have wiped out the country's debt, but it wasn't, thanks to the IMF. Wow. So these are the dilemmas and the contradictions. And then you had, of course, the fact that Niger is of strategic importance to the United States as well as France, being that, you know, it was a major source of uranium and they were getting it so cheaply as well. Yeah, because Niger's uranium was providing around 20% of its supply, which is needed to fuel the nuclear plants that France uses to provide roughly 70% of their country with electricity. So Niger's uranium providing 70% of France's electricity, whilst only 4% of Nigerians had access to modern electrical services. And while 40% of the population live in extreme poverty. So we are light up France like Christmas tree, whilst Niger is in darkness. 85% of the company that operates Niger's uranium industry is owned by France's Atomic Energy Commission, and 2 French companies, and only 15% is owned by the Nigerian government. Wow. So, you know, what was clear is that the French nuclear power, sorry about that noise in the background, sounds like someone's car alarm has gone off. So yeah, Niger was exporting enough uranium to France to generate 50% of their electricity. I'm going to shut that window. Oh, okay. No, I don't need to. Yeah. Oh, my days. See, France there, light up like Christmas tree. Yeah. Thanks to the uranium from Niger that they were getting for next to nothing. That's where the wealth of Africa was going. And, you know, ECOWAS, well, ECOWAS, after the coup that happened in Niger, they decided that they were going to step in, didn't they, as a force to be reckoned with. France, you know, was so frightened of losing Niger. They were so frightened of, not just for their sake, but for also for America's sake, that they wanted ECOWAS and instructed ECOWAS, along with other European countries, to go in and get back Niger for them, you know? So these ECOWAS countries that were loyal to the West, you know, actually prepared to send in 25,000 Africans in an attempt to take back Niger and give it back to Bazoum. So they had troops from Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Senegal at the time under the last leadership, and Benin. And they were going to, and were planning to launch a war against Niger. But then you see, this is where people power is so important. There was a social media frenzy and condemnation, you know, of ECOWAS and the countries who were planning to go in against Niger. So, you know, the ECOWAS anti-Niger 15-nation bloc, and their leaders were actually forced to take a back seat. And despite the huge sums of money that they were paid, the job ECOWAS was unable to follow through because of the demonstrations that were being held, not just in Africa, but in the diaspora as well. I was outside, you know, the French embassy, along with many others here in the UK, demonstrating against France's interference in Niger and the threat to send in, you know, an ECOWAS army. And then we have, and we still have in our midst, stooges like Kenya's President Ruto, who has now been approached. And, you know, at the time, he was condemning the coup in Niger, claiming that coup d'etat defies democracy. What's democracy when it comes to Africa? He was claiming, Ruto was claiming, this is an undemocratic removal of a leader. You know, and anyway, his position just added to the backlash from the citizens across Africa, who was applauding the removal of Bazoum because he didn't represent the interest of the people. The people were suffering, as I've showed you, from the decades of impoverishment. Why should they have to continue in impoverishment? And so, following a season of power, you know, of course, it was strongly condemned by France, but widely celebrated by the people. And, you know, Niger kicked out the French troops and they were made to leave. And, you know, hundreds of US troops as well as Italian and German troops will remain in the country. It's just a matter of time, I'm sure, before they get their marching orders as well. And so, you know, rise up, some might say, and I would say, the revolutionary leadership in Niger. Now, you know, we have, the plans that they put in place for the US to depart from Niger by mid-September. That's what the Pentagon is saying. So, you know, steps are in place for the US and their forces to withdraw from Niger. Because, I mean, how dangerous is it to have the enemy forces in your own backyard? Not only is it a danger for your country and your citizens and the infrastructure of your country, but it's also extremely dangerous for neighboring countries as well. Yeah. So we know that the US had actually relied on Niger to be one of its primary bases in the region in its so-called fight against jihadist activity. But from all of the statistics, you're going to see that, you know, the fight against jihadist activities, the death, the destruction, the war, you know, was spiraling upwards, not downwards. And so, you know, the Nigerian military, when they seized power, you know, they firstly told the French to leave, and now they're moving closer to Russia, and also have asked the US to move out as well. They've suspended cooperation with the international Francophone body. And so they're suspending, you know, some of these military agreements, and eventually all the military agreements that they had with the 88-member body, because they can see right through these agreements that they had. And here's a look at the environmental impact of neocolonialism. Here's a look at the price Niger was paying for the extraction of uranium. Here's a look at the price that the planet has paid, the destruction to the planet that modern living, our modern lifestyle is causing to the planet. This is a crime against the planet. The fuel needed to fuel Western industries, the fuel that's needed to fuel the Western lifestyle is having a major impact on the planet. It's destroying, you know, the natural environment. It destroys the waterways because, you know, they have to wash all these minerals and metals, and then the water that they've used to wash it goes into the waterways, it goes into the rivers, and it finds its way to the forests, it poisons the plants, the soil, the agricultural land, the water. Irresponsible mining and logging, and the extent of it is incalculable. The chemical poisoning to the agricultural land in the name of fast food, in the name of modern living, you know, comes with its long-term environmental consequences. So Niger are working to bring about a change in all of that. And when we cross over to Burkina Faso, yesterday when I was finishing off the preparation for this presentation, he was, and I was addressing him as, you know, the interim president of Burkina Faso. But as we have learned, you know, this great revolutionary leader who embodies the spirit of Thomas Sankara, you know, is now the president of Burkina Faso. I'll say a bit more about that in a little while. So what are the economic indicators of Burkina Faso? First of all, we're seeing that, you know, as an African nation, its size is about 106 square meters, and that in 2017, the gross domestic product, GDP, was roughly about 12.9 billion, which was the 124th highest in the world. That's according to the data that was collected by the World Bank in 2017. They're also, according to the IMF, at one time, the 171st largest economy in the world by its per capita growth. So from all of that, it sounds great, doesn't it? You know, you'd expect the economy to be doing really well, that people will be enjoying a good standard of living, bearing in mind all of the natural resources that they've got, the arable land, the growing crops, you know, and a whole range of other natural minerals that they have, you know, 12.9 billion in GDP. Let's have a look at the poverty indicators. Well, the poverty indicators are showing that Burkina Faso is described, and its population is described as one of the poorest countries in the world, with 40.1% of the population living below the poverty line. And in terms of poverty ranking, there were 144 out of 157 countries on the new Human Capital Index established by the World Bank. They claim that the country is suffering from limited natural resources, being landlocked. It's like, really? Am I reading about Burkina Faso? And then we find that it's a country that has been ravaged in AIDS, and that, you know, Burkina Faso's public debt was 6.7 million, which ought to be nothing, you know, when you consider the billions that it was making. But, you know, for some reason, you know, they were unable to repay the debt to the extent where it represented 37%, where the debt reached 42% of their GDP. It's like, what's going on? The maths just don't seem to add up. On the one hand, a country that has such enormous amounts of natural resources and is obviously very industrious in terms of the amount of resources that's being extracted, but so and in terms of the GDP, but the level of poverty, where is the wealth going? So clearly huge amounts of mineral wealth, you know, but in terms of the work that the people were involved in, it was the very poor end of subsistence farming, growing peanuts, shea butter, shea nuts, sesame, sorghum. You know, they were employed in large numbers in that very, you know, low-end economy. And the small but very hugely profitable industry sector was benefiting from all of its resources. Right, let me get quickly on because I'm over time already, as always, but I'm pushing through. So although Burkina Faso on the one hand was described as a very poor country, you know, its mineral wealth and resources was valued at over 12 billion in 1 year alone in 2017. So how can you have a mineral wealth that's, I think I was just repeating myself there. Let's look at some of the mineral resources the country has, in addition to what I've said. You've got gold, zinc, copper, manganese, phosphate, limestone in substantial quantities. They've got reserves of diamonds, bauxite, nickel, vanadium. Don't even know what that one is. But these and so much more, most of them remain unexploited because those who are exploiting the wealth of Burkina Faso are exploiting it, you know, to the extent that they can, that they've already noted that so much is the wealth, so great is the wealth of this economy. You know, there's so much more that is yet to be even exploited. So the real story is, and this was in an article in the Guardian newspaper about 7 years ago or so, the reality is that Africa is financing the development of the so-called first world. Developing countries were actually receiving, so the developing countries, which is Africa, received 1.3 trillion in aid. But at the same time, 3.3 trillion flowed out of Africa back to those same countries who were supposedly providing us with aid. So they have this wonderful story that their media pumps out about how poor and impoverished Africa is and how we need their aid and how we're the begging bowl of the world. And they, you know, are got such a big heart, you know, they have to give us all this aid. Well, when the maths was done, wow, it revealed, and as reported in the Guardian newspaper, you know, it's not me that did the research, researchers did it. It found that although Africa or the developing countries it said developing countries, it might not just have been Africa, received 1.3 trillion in aid. What was flowing back out from those developing countries was valued at 3.3 trillion. In other words, developing countries were sending 2 trillion more to the rest of the world than they were receiving. Wow, we're not beggars. We're financing countries like France, countries like the US, countries like Britain. Wow. And in 1980, it said that the net flows added up to an eye-popping 16.3 trillion. Wow. So if we look at all the years since 1980, rather, the value of the outflow from Africa to the rest of the world was 16.3 trillion. The rest of the world, the developed world, is draining Africa of its finances, its resources, its potential. Wow. The biggest chunk of it, as we know, going into Europe and America. Yeah. So, as we know, Burkina Faso is actually rich beyond measure. But what was happening was a lot of that wealth was just going out of Burkina Faso and into the pockets and the bank accounts and the industries of non-Burkina Fasans. So, in come the military, kick out France and their diplomats for subversive activities, you know. And since coming to power, since the coup happened in 2022, Burkina's military government has pulled away from France and its former colonial control. And it's kicked out their troops, suspended some of the French media as well, because those media repeatedly, as they do, try to undermine the works of the president of Burkina Faso. And, you know, it's reported that tensions have been growing across the Sahel region about the expanding army presence and militarization in the region for what foreign states were calling the war against terror. That we know that that war against terror, at any point, we could have become the victims of that terror in those countries, and all of our citizens could have been looking at a situation like Palestine is facing right now. And so those countries have already experienced more than their fair share of civilian deaths, violence, proxy wars, humanitarian crisis, etc., etc. They were extremely critical of France, you know, and France's mistreatment of those countries in those regions. So the military specialists in Burkina Faso brought in Russia, and they have been developing a relationship with Russia. The Burkina Faso has also been developing a relationship with the other countries that have recently had coups, like Niger, Mali, and now Senegal. Senegal didn't have a coup, but as we know, you know, they're still very much of the like-minded ilk. And so Russia, you know, they have, you know, sworn to support Burkina Faso and the other countries that was at the Africa-Russia summit that appealed to Russia for military specialist support and training. Burkina Faso no longer relies on the West for arms because they're also getting some of their weapons from North Korea as well. And, you know, North Korea has supplied arms to Burkina Faso's recently recruited 50,000 soldiers. And may Burkina Faso go on to ensure that all of the young people of their country get military training as part of, you know, their rites of passage. So, yeah, Burkina Faso, they're buying new drones now. They've just bought a number of new state-of-the-art drones from Turkey. They're getting themselves armed, and they've also formed a pact, a military pact with Mali and Niger. And so this is absolutely powerful, a powerful move indeed. So on the military front, touch one, touch all. That is the clear message that they are sending out to their former colonizer. And this is how we got to move. And, you know, President Ibrahim Traoré has been making some major moves as well. He's been equipping his farmers. He recognizes the importance of food sustainability as a critical priority for Africa. You know, the government of Burkina Faso has been subsidizing agriculture. Just going to close the door. 1 second, please, family. Some spray from in here. Okay, I'm back. Oh, I hate the smell of that. You know, like air freshener spray. It always gets me when it gets sprayed, so I just shut the door so it doesn't come in to remind me. So, yeah, food sustainability, and they've like subsidized this. He's subsidizing the agricultural sector. This is a major, major move. You know, 78 billion in CFA francs has gone into boosting the agricultural sector. A major move indeed. Burkina Faso, just yesterday, family, in a public meeting, actually announced, well, let's get my tongue around all of this. President of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, is now officially the president of Burkina Faso. Up until yesterday, he was the interim president of Burkina Faso. So the breaking news is he is now the president of Burkina Faso, head of state and supreme leader of the armed forces. He was such was the popularity, such is the popularity of this great man and the works that he's been doing among his people, that when he decided he was going to step down and, you know, because they were preparing to hand over the presidency to a civilian process, there's people's like, no, we don't want you to go. We don't want you to step down. And so at the meeting that was designed to talk about how they were going to transition from military rule to civil rule, it was moved that the presidency should go to this great man of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, and that the interim presidency should be extended for 5 years, and that the title should be changed, giving him the title of president of Burkina Faso instead of interim president. And then after his 5 years term, where they've extended this transitional period, after the 5-year term, he has the option, should he want to do so, to actually run for president. So we're absolutely delighted. This is history in the making. It was just yesterday that I was addressing Ibrahim Traoré as the interim president of Burkina Faso, and I woke up this morning to the breaking news that he is now the president of Burkina Faso, head of state and supreme leader of the armed forces. He was due to step down, as I said, and hand over the interim presidency to a civilian rule, but the people came out in such a huge show of support for their interim president, calling on him, you know, to continue to rule for another 5 years. And we are delighted with the progress that he's making. You know, we're delighted that, you know, he has responded to the call and that he's accepted the position of president of Burkina Faso. Wow. History in the making, family. This is, you know, all happening during our time. And all I can say is France must be screaming. If they were waiting for the end of June, when they expected the transition to be handed over to civilians, so that they could have, you know, got involved and manipulated the whole process, as they tend to do, you know, manipulate the so-called democratic electoral process in favor of their hand-picked African puppets. If that's what they were waiting for, they are absolutely shocked by this new charter that has given 5 years, an additional 5 years to the new president, Ibrahim Traoré, to continue running Burkina Faso. So yeah, rise him up, rise him up. In the short term, he has provided good military leadership. It's evidence and demonstration that a good military leadership can run a country. That countries, African countries, can run very well under a military leadership. He's an example of that. The interim president of Mali is an example of that. The interim president of Niger is another example of how the military can run the country in the interest of its own people. And as we know, the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, has the love, the heart, the mind, the confidence of his people. And we see that demonstrated over and over again when he has these public meetings that they turn up to. Also, we want to rise up the interim president of Mali. Yes, as we celebrate African Liberation Day, we're celebrating also the interim president of Mali. He has told the so-called UN peacekeepers that they need to leave. Mali is another country that was overrun with so-called peacekeepers, so-called militia groups, so-called foreign armies. And after 10 years of encountering Islamic militias in their country, after 10 years of seeing the slaughtering of so many of their people, they told France that they had to go. So last year, France withdrew its forces from Mali, and Mali brought in the Russia's Wagner group to give them the training that they needed. So another move where another African country has sent the French forces packing. I mean, but what was the French record like when it came to so-called fighting Islamist extremists on their borders, and plus having 5,000 UN peacekeepers managed by the French troops as well. What was the outcome of all of that? Well, as we can see from this chart here, oops, hang on, sorry, decline that. So, right, my apologies, the two are linked, and it's going to stop in just a second. There we go. And it's on silence. I don't know why it's coming through. Oh, sorry, my WhatsApp has come up. Let's just stop share for a second, and I'll go back in just a second. Right. Okay, family, sorry about that. Let me just send a quick message to let the caller know that I'm busy and will call back. That way it'll stop them calling me again. Busy, will call back. Right, sorry about that interference. Yeah, time is whizzing by as well. Oh my days. I'll tell you, I can talk from now to Christmas, but I am coming to the end of my presentation, family. You will be pleased to know. And, I'm just celebrating right now African Liberation Day and exonerating the great revolutionary freedom fighters. Right, let me just go back to the YouTube channel and go back to, okay, what's going on here? Am I not live anymore? Yes, okay. Right, my slide is still up. I might have ended the meeting accidentally. I hope not. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Am I not live anymore? Oh my goodness gracious me. What's going on? Sorry, family. I'm just seeing what's going on here. That call and to get rid of the call in my haste, it looks as though I might have cut myself off. Let's have a look. No, I'm still live. I'm still there. Oh, good. Okay, I can see the chat has come up on there. So why is it not here? Sorry, I'll get myself organized, family. Let's go and get to my channel. Yeah. Right, let's get to the live. Here we go. No, that's not the right one. Gosh. Here we are, revolutionary perspective. Oh no. No, that's not the one. Where's my live? I wonder if you could tell me that to find in the lives. Here we are. Here we are. There we are. Here I am. I'm back. I'm black. Okay, right. So let's go over to. There's only a few slides left, family, and I'm going to whiz through them. Okay, so let me let's go back. How are you doing in the chat? Hopefully everyone is doing fine. I can see some messages there that I wasn't seeing before. Rise up, rise up. Kwame Oboje says, happy ALD, happy Sista Shanice. Yeah, rise up. Just to keep squeezing. What's this? No apology needed. This is a brilliant presentation, Shanice. Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. I'm going hot and sweaty because of what happened there. Okay, let me go back into Zoom and share screen again. And yes, whoever's ringing should be ringing me. You should know that I'm doing this presentation. I'll send out the notices. Hey, right, let's share screen. Still recording. Okay, that's good. Okay, here we go. Share. And let's find the presentation. Yep, let's go into presenter view. We'll get there in just a second. I'm going to whiz through the rest of it because I've got so many slides. Come on, presenter view, come on. It's just doing a little spin and it's going to take me into presenter mode. Here we are. Okay, so let's have a quick look. How successful was the mission in Mali? Yeah, so you had, all the French military and you had the UN peacekeepers all over, Mali on its borders, fighting terrorism. Well, let's have a look. In 2020, so fatalities in Mali and the violence. The sky blue color, those are the number of fatalities that civilians suffered. The one in the middle, the purple color, is the number of fatalities that the Malian security forces suffered, and the kind of, what color would you call that? Anyway, kind of tanny color, the deep red kind of color, that's the overall fatalities. And as you can see, year on year, 2020, 2021, 2022 is getting from bad to worse. And I'm right for run them out. Pure problem, them are cars, and so Mali said, end of this Operation Bahrain where you're fighting, terrorists, because, since you're in there fighting terrorists, things are just getting from bad to worse. And so, they sent, the military packing as well. And these are some of the challenges there and the discontentment around Operation Bahrain. Yes, they called them in initially, and that's probably because, they had to be invited in because, at the time they were convinced that it would be Mali's interest to bring them in to fight terrorism because they're the expert of fighting terrorism, but they failed miserably in that effort. And as a result, considerable anti-French sentiment, grew around that. And, following on from that conference, the summit between France and Russia, between Africa and Russia, Mali's military as well officially entered into agreements with Russia. And, this was a major move because, again, Mali, another very, very rich gold-producing country. In fact, they have just entered into an agreement with Russia that they're going to be building a gold refinery country. And so we're looking forward to that country, as it did in the times of old, going back to what it does best, producing products in gold. And then there was the recent dialogue between Mali. They wanted to extend the military rule. I don't know what happened there. It didn't go through for the Malian leader. It may well be that there are some infiltrators who are undermining what's happening in Mali. We need to keep an eye on this one here. But the Malian president I mean, he is working in partnership with Burkina Faso, with Niger, you know, and the president, Goita, is making similar moves, but we need to support those moves. And then, of course, coming in very recently was the newly elected president, Diomaye Faye of Senegal, who's going to be joining, you know, the pack. Why? Because if you look at the situation facing the people in Senegal, it's the same story. 50.8% of the population, they've come up with a new word for poverty now. They're saying that they're suffering multidimensionally, that they're multidimensionally poor. They're suffering poverty on a multiplicity of levels: nutrition, child mortality, lack of schooling, etc., etc. It's like, what? How could this be? So anyway, the people, decided that enough is enough. They know how rich their country is, and they're fed up of the suffering because their government has been selling them out. And so there's been mass demonstrations in Senegal against the former government, and mass celebrations in support of Ousmane Sonko, who was the main leader, the main opposition leader. But what they managed to do was to arrest him and Faye as well. This is what the old regime done, to take him out of the race for presidency, because, you know, they knew that he was going to be a real challenge. And these protests, people died protesting. You know, 500 people arrested, 23 people died in 2023 in those protests, but the people were determined to see change. And so when Ousmane Sonko and Diomaye were freed from prison 10 days before the country's elections, there was euphoria in the country. And Ousmane Sonko wasn't able to run because the establishment had done a good job of, you know, taking away his opportunity to run. So what he did, he said to his voters, vote for Faye. You know, I stand with this man. And he did. He stood with Diomaye Faye, and all Sonko's voters voted for Diomaye Faye. So that was the plan B. And that's why it's so important to have a plan B. I hope these leaders, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, I hope they've got their plan B. I hope they have their succession of leaders with the same mindset. Because what tends to happen is that these people take out one leader and then someone else comes in who has a different mindset. But here we are, you know, in Senegal with the number 2 to Sonko, who had the same mindset. And so they are already recognizing the fact that Senegal is a wealthy country. It has gold, titanium, iron ore, oil, phosphate, agricultural produces, you know, and their gold production amounted to 387.7 billion in CFA francs. So where's all that money? Why are the people so poor? Yet, you know, their country is so rich in wealth and oil. Anyway, he's inherited this extremely rich country, rich in natural minerals and resources. And also, you know, they had been negotiating oil contracts because, you know, Senegal is going to become a major producer of petroleum oil and gas. It's already a major producer and exporter of petroleum oils and gold and many other. But it's gonna get even bigger. Yeah, and Senegal's also got diamonds and iron ore. It's rich beyond measure. These African countries are rich. They're not poor. Don't believe the Western narrative. Africa's not poor. Africa has just been poorly managed because we didn't follow the Casablanca plan. Anyway, Senegal's newly elected president, he's already announced that he's going to investigate the oil and gas mining contracts that were handed out by the former leader. We know what happened there. You know, all of these contracts, he says, need to be probed and renegotiated if necessary. And he's obviously not going to be accepting the same exploitative type of contracts that the former president did, because as far as he's concerned, the country's natural resources belong to the people. Here, here. you know? So he wants the exploration of natural resources to continue, but as long as the people benefit. So under his government, he's going to ensure, and he's already pledged to ensure, that the people will benefit from any of the resources that's extracted from his country. And he's doing a comprehensive investigation and audit into what's been going on. So it's a departure for Senegal from the dependency model to self-sufficiency model, and that's what's happening, you know, in the Sahel region at the moment. So these are wonderful, wonderful days and wonderful times indeed. So what we're seeing, if you look at the map of where these countries are, where Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger and Senegal are located in Africa, you will notice that it's in the region of the former Mali Empire. Woo! The old Mali Empire spanned modern-day countries like Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, you know, but back then, the empire, they say, covered about 478,000 square miles worth of land. That's 1.2 million kilometers worth of land. That was in 1350. Okay, remember that, yeah? That's in 1350. Well, today, if we look at the regional bloc, hang on, sorry, no, I've jumped a bit. Sorry about that. I've gone on to talking about ECOWAS. We know about ECOWAS, so we know about their threats. Let's skip that. Let's skip the threats from ECOWAS and the shockwaves, you know, that Burkina Faso and the likes have sent through ECOWAS. Let's skip that. I want to get on to my calculations to do with the Mali Empire. Okay, where is it? Hang on, family. Let me see if I can find it. I did a little bit of calculation there. Yeah, I can't see where it is now. So what I'm going to do is, okay, let me just go back to the map where I had Mali Empire. What we're talking about, family, is wow, huge. Okay, it's in my notes. Right, so Niger alone has a total of 1.267 million square kilometers of land. It's the 22nd biggest country in the world. The old Mali Empire was 1.24 million, 1.24 million kilometers. Niger alone is 1.267 million kilometers. Niger alone is larger than the Mali Empire was. So added to that size of the empire today, we have Mali with a landmass of 1.24 million kilometers, right? Because they are the 24th biggest country in the world. And we have Burkina Faso with an area of 274,000 square kilometers. So together, these three countries are more than twice the size of the Mali Empire. Our brothers are building an empire. They have an empire mindset. And if they maintain control of the resources that they have the potential to be greater and richer than the ancient Mali Empire under the famous Mansa Musa, who was the richest man of the world. Wow. It's huge, family. I'm going to skate forward. We know there's going to be saboteurs. We've got to look out for those saboteurs. We've got to look out for those who are going to try and instigate their covert operations in collaboration with their paymasters, the former colonizers. We've got to watch out for those. We've got to continue to educate our people so that they are aware, you know, of the importance to stay behind, stand up in support of good leadership. Our people have campaigned long and hard for change. Well, change is here. We no longer need their armies that are in our borders, murdering our people. We no longer need them to lead us. We no longer need their monetary systems. We don't need their economic systems. We don't need their education systems, their health systems. We don't need any of that. We are part capable of managing our country ourselves, and our people in these newly elected countries are saying our armies are quite capable and able of protecting us from militia groups. We don't want foreign interference anymore. We don't want outsiders coming in and continuing to exploit our resources. We'll do business with you, but it has to be on better terms. The days of exploitation and oppression of us as a people is over, and the people power is so important. So what we are seeing today, we're hoping, is Africa's potential, the potential for Africa to rise to her fullest, the potential for the whole of Africa to rise economically, politically, scientifically, agriculturally, herbally, medicinally, militarily. Using our own resources, we can do it, family. We can transform the continent. We can be the transformation that we want to see. And these revolutionary leaders, if they're allowed and are protected by their people, will be able to be the difference that we want to see. We have to put our ethnic differences to one side, our tribal differences, and all the other differences, the religious differences, the identity differences, like what's going on in Sudan and Congo and Cameroon and all these other places in Africa. We've got to put all those differences behind us, because together, family, we are a powerhouse, a potential powerhouse. Together we are strong. United we are strong, but divided we are weak. And we've experienced 66 years because we failed to grab the opportunity at independence. And we've all been impacting on it as a result. So looking ahead, we're looking to the Burkina, Mali, Niger coming together, and Senegal, those countries coming together, and forming a new currency. So the West African Regional Bloc adopts new plans to launch the ECO single currency. They originally planned to launch it, I think it was in 2020, but because of the big the big V and all of that, COVID, those plans got put to one side. Don't be surprised if something doesn't happen in 2027 to try and scupper the plans again. But so far, 15 West African countries have come together to buy into this new single currency. That includes Benin, Burkina Faso, Gabon, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Togo. Powerful. I've touched on the riches of just a few of those countries. This is a potentially powerful move. We have to stop buying into that single narrative story that Africa is poor. Africa is not poor. Africa is just has been poorly managed. Africa has been exploited, and it's time for change. So we look forward to the alliance that these great men of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Senegal are forming, this mutual defense pact that they have, where they're training together and they're working in partnership with countries like Russia, Turkey, and Korea, to put a solid defense position together. We're looking now ahead of this being the beginning of a new day for Africa. We have the blueprint. There's so much that we have learned and must learn from history. And, we're looking for other countries in Africa to join the pact. I'm very concerned at the moment about countries like Kenya and the new relationship that they're forming with the US. Very concerning indeed. Nigeria, just given over vast swathes of land to allow the Americans to build the biggest embassy or consulate ever anywhere in the world. This is crazy. This is like allowing your enemy in your own backyard to have their military in your back door so that they can have access, within striking range to your neighbors. Crazy things going on at the moment with some of these old sellouts, you know, of governments, you know. So we need to adopt the Casablanca approach. We must learn from history. We must stop the continued suffering of our people and the hell of living in an impoverished lifestyle while we allow the Europeans to continue to extract our resources for little and next to nothing. It's time for change on all those different levels. And we have to, in the diaspora, support our brothers and sisters on the continent. And I just want to highlight just a few of some of the great, outstanding Pan-Africanist revolutionaries in our time who are doing the great work, speaking our truths and from an African-centered perspective. So rise up, Dr. Arikana Chambori Kwaya, rise up, Piero Lumumba, rise up, King Joshua Maponga, and there are so many more that I could rise up. But very importantly, I want to rise up you, the citizens of the African world on the continent and in the diaspora. We all want progress. We all want to see progress and change happen on the continent. We are very aware of the obstacles that have been put in our way of our progress, but we are the ones who need to remove those obstacles that are in the way. We are the ones who need to be the providers of everything we need to sustain ourselves as a people. We are the ones who must not listen to their lies on the television about how we need to solve our problems. We are the ones who need to, you know, condemn institutions like ECOWAS and the works, you know, of countries like Kenya that's planning to send in a force to Haiti. We have to, you know, bring those leaders, you know, to check. And we need, you know, Africa to have leaders who have got the interests of their nations at heart. And so we rise up those honorable men, those honorable great men. We rise up the men of integrity at the helm. We rise up the leaders of countries that are doing the great works, and not the likes of Christian Malanga, but I haven't got time to go into that right now. So this is where I'm going to end my presentation for today. Family, I want to thank you so much for listening. Wow, what a journey, what a revolutionary journey we have been on. I've just taken you on a tour from the days of enslavement right up to date, right up until now. And for those of you who have been with me from the beginning of today's broadcast, thank you so much. I hope that, you know, the presentation has met your expectations. The presentation was designed to bring you a revolutionary perspective of our liberation journey. And I wanted to celebrate, you know, some of our greats that have gone before us and to celebrate the greats within our midst today as well. So I'm just wrapping up now. I'm just going to go into the chat and pull out just a few comments and hear what you've been saying. Kwame Abodje, rise up, rise up. I've been told I say your name wrong. My apologies. Obwaji, Kwame Obwaji, rise up, rise up. The Western Hemisphere must get out of our mamaland right now, he says. Ain't so. TV says we have to make them. Indeed. And our family have been doing a great job. I want to rise up. Kimani says, excellent presentation. I second that. Brother Simon, rising up the people of the sun. Kwame Obwaje, rising up Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, telling Macron to get lost, and rightly so. Papa Cheesy in the house as well. Rise up yourself, watching us from the beautiful continent of Bermuda. And so TV says, love that, touch one, touch all. I was thinking, you take one of ours, we'll take 10 of yours. Hey, that's the way it used to be. Imani, rise up, rise up. He says, you keep going, beloved Sister Shanice, Pan-African Congress movement. Rise up, brother Imani. Great to have you in the house as well. And to each of you that have been commenting, thank you for your encouraging remarks. Thank you so much. I'm looking through and some of you are saying, love it, Sister Shanice, more please. Thank you, thank you. Valerie H is in the house, Kathleen, thank you so much. Brother Kwame says, Ashe to our countries of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, telling the French, we owe you nothing. Exactly. Gary Ricketts is saying the lines are being drawn. And the rebirth of the Songhai Empire, Ashe, the rebirth of the great empires, indeed. Jay saying, thank you so much, Sister Shanice. I've been fed today. Thank you so much. Minnie Kita, rise up yourself as well. Kwame Oboje, keep rising, keep rising. And each and every one of you, I thank you so much for tuning in. You know, continue to enjoy the African Liberation Day events that are happening all around the world. You know, some of you are probably engaged in events on the continent. You know, I'm just going to go and continue celebrating African Liberation Day 2024 here as well. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation, the revolutionary Pan-Africanist presentation. I want to thank you so much. Please do like the video if you haven't already done so, and please do share, pull out bits and pieces, maybe use it as a learning tool. I've done the research. I know there's so much more I could have added, but you know how it goes. Time is always against us. So thank you so much to each and every one of you for tuning in today. More love, more strength. Sister Shanice out of here for now. Bye for now. See you on Wednesday. Join me live, 8 p.m. UK time, BST time, 7 p.m. GMT.